Stop whining. It's already sold. That's what my son said when I asked about my husband's Rolex, the only thing I had left of Charles after he died. He didn't even look guilty. He said he needed the money for a vacation. I felt something inside me break. That watch wasn't about money, it was about memory. It was the sound of Charles winding it every morning, the one routine that made me feel he was still here. I went to the pawn shop, desperate to buy it back, but the owner looked at me and said, "Ma'am, you need to see what we found inside the watch." And that's when I realized this wasn't just about a missing Rolex. It was the beginning of uncovering everything my husband and my own son had been hiding from me. Stay with me. Subscribe, like, and share if you've ever learned that betrayal can come from the people closest to you. My name is Evelyn Hartman. I'm 73 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Chicago. 6 months ago, I lost my husband, Charles. We were married for 43 years. Since the day he passed, the house has been too quiet, like even the walls forgot how to make noise. Every morning, I still catch myself waiting to hear his steps coming down the hall, the sound of the coffee maker, the way he used to hum while winding his old Rolex watch. That watch was the last thing of his I had left. It was a cold winter afternoon when it happened. The sunlight came through the kitchen window, hitting the sink where I was washing dishes. I was just doing my routine, thinking about dinner, when my son David walked in. He looked restless, like he wanted to say something but didn't want to be questioned. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then said, "Stop whining. It's already sold." At first, I didn't understand what he meant. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "The Rolex," he said, looking right at me. "I sold it." "You never wear it, Mom. I needed the money for our trip." I froze. My hands were still wet from the sink, and the cup I was holding slipped and broke in the basin. For a few seconds, I just stared at him, trying to make sense of the words that had just come out of his mouth. My son had sold his father's watch, the one thing that meant the world to me. "You sold your father's watch?" I said quietly, still not believing it. David shrugged like it was nothing. "It's just a watch, Mom. You should let it go." Before I could say anything else, Lydia, my daughter-in-law, walked into the kitchen. She was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention. "You should really move on, Evelyn," she said in that calm, polite voice that always made me feel small. Holding on to these things isn't healthy. I could feel my chest tightening. They didn't see the watch the way I did. To them, it was just metal and glass. To me, it was every morning Charles spent getting ready for work, every trip we took together, every small habit that made up a lifetime. When the hospital handed me his wedding ring and that watch in a plastic bag, I thought at least I'd have one piece of him left. "How much did you get for it?" I asked, even though I didn't want to know. $800, David said. Not bad for something that old. I almost laughed. $800. He'd sold the only thing that mattered for the price of a cheap vacation flight. "That watch was worth more than $3,000, I said. "In your imagination, maybe," Lydia replied, still staring at her phone. I didn't bother arguing. There was no point. They lived in a world where everything could be replaced, where memories didn't hold value. "I'm going to get it back," I said finally. My voice was calm, but inside I was shaking. David rolled his eyes. "Good luck, Mom. We're flying out tomorrow morning. Lydia's been planning this for months." He said it so casually, as if this was just another small disagreement we'd get over. Then they turned to leave. Lydia paused by the door and added, "You should really talk to someone, Evelyn. This isn't normal." The door closed behind them. The sound echoed through the house like a reminder of how alone I was. I stood there for a long time, staring at the broken cup in the sink and the empty spot on my wrist where Charles's watch used to be. For a moment, I felt completely hollow. Then something shifted. I realized I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let them take that last connection to my husband and walk away like it didn't matter. Charles used to tell me that I had more strength than I gave myself credit for. "You just hide it behind good manners," he'd say with a smile. Maybe it was time to stop hiding it. I took a deep breath, dried my hands, and reached for my purse. I still remembered the name of the pawn shop from what David had said, Golden State Pawn on Milwaukee Avenue. If they thought they could sell pieces of my life without asking, they were about to find out who I really was. As I stepped outside, the air was cold, and I could see my breath in front of me. For the first time in months, I felt awake, not just surviving, but ready to act. I got in my car, started the engine, and said quietly to myself, "He wound it every morning. Now, I have to rewind my life without him." And with that, I drove toward the pawn shop. The next morning, I drove to Golden State Pawn. It was a small shop in an old part of town, squeezed between a discount tire place and a closed bakery. The paint on the sign was peeling, and the windows were full of scratched guitars, used tools, and cheap jewelry that had lost its shine years ago. Inside, the air smelled like metal and old paper. A tiny bell rang when I opened the door. The man behind the counter looked up from a pile of receipts. He was in his 50s, stocky, arms covered in faded tattoos. His name tag said Danny. When our eyes met, I could tell he already knew who I was. "You're here for the Rolex, right?" he said before I could even speak. "Your son warned me you might show up." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My son warned him. So David knew exactly what he had done and still made sure I couldn't undo it. It felt like a second betrayal, smaller, sharper, but it cut just as deep. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Yes, I want to buy it back." Danny sighed and leaned on the counter. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but it's already sold. A guy came in yesterday morning, paid cash. In this business, once it's gone, it's gone." I stared at him, not sure what to say. I wasn't angry at Danny. He was just doing his job. Still, hearing it out loud made it real. The last thing of Charles's that I had was now sitting on another man's wrist somewhere in Chicago. "Could you tell me who bought it?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "No name. Cash sale, no paperwork required." I nodded, trying to hide the tears burning behind my eyes. "All right. Thank you anyway." I turned to leave, feeling smaller than I had in years. But before I reached the door, Danny called after me. "Ma'am, wait a second." I turned around. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small manila envelope. "We found something when we cleaned the watch. Figured you'd want it." I hesitated, then walked back to him. The envelope was thin and light, sealed with old tape. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "What is it?" I asked. He shrugged. "Don't know. Looked personal." I unfolded the paper carefully. It was Charles's handwriting, neat, deliberate, the same way he used to write grocery lists and birthday cards. At the top, in blue ink, it said, "Evelyn's birthday, July 15th, 1955, the day I knew I'd marry her." My throat tightened. I ran my fingers over the letters like touching them could bring him back. Beneath that line, there were several letters and numbers written in a small, careful script. SS 4057 CH 015DS. I stared at it, confused. It didn't look like anything familiar. Too organized to be random, too strange to be anything simple. Danny was watching me, his voice softer now. "Guess he hid that inside the watch somehow. Real professional job, like a jeweler did it. Didn't notice until we cleaned the case." I swallowed hard. Did the man who bought it see this? He looked uneasy. Maybe. When I mentioned we found something inside, he got real interested. Asked if we opened it. Paid cash and left fast. Seemed to know exactly what he wanted. That sent a chill through me. Whoever bought the watch hadn't just been shopping. He'd been looking for that specific one. "Did he say his name?" I asked again. Danny shook his head. "No, ma'am, didn't leave one." I slipped the paper back into the envelope and clutched it in my hand. It felt warm, like it had been waiting for me. "Thank you," I said. He nodded, still looking a bit guilty. "I'm sorry about your watch. Your son seemed determined, but for what it's worth, he didn't look happy about it either." I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk about David anymore. I just wanted to leave before I started crying in front of a stranger. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face. I stood on the sidewalk looking at the traffic, the people rushing by with their coffee cups and shopping bags. None of them knew that my whole life had just shifted because of a small piece of paper inside a watch. I walked back to my car and sat for a long moment before starting the engine. I opened the envelope again, studying the code. The first letters, SS, looked like initials. The next numbers, 4457 CH015DS, felt deliberate, like something Charles had created for a reason. He'd never mentioned anything like this. In 43 years of marriage, I thought I'd known everything about him. Now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe he'd left this for me to find. Maybe there was something he wanted me to discover. As I held the paper in my hands, I felt a strange mix of grief and curiosity. Losing the watch hurt, but this small clue, this secret, suddenly gave me a reason to keep going. For months after Charles died, I'd been living on autopilot, doing what everyone expected. staying quiet, staying polite, pretending I was fine. But sitting there in that old parking lot, I realized I wasn't done yet. Something about that code, that hidden message, felt important, and I was going to find out what it meant, no matter how long it took. I started the car, tucked the envelope safely into my purse, and whispered, "I'll find it, Charles. Whatever you wanted me to know, I'll find it." As I drove away, the last light of afternoon hit the windshield, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to purpose. When I got home, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound louder, the heater clicking on, the floor creaking under my shoes, the wind pressing against the windows. I sat at the kitchen table and turned on the small lamp beside me. The yellow light fell over the envelope from the pawn shop. I opened it again and laid the paper flat on the table. Charles's handwriting stared back at me. At the top, his message. Evelyn's birthday, July 15th, 1955, the day I knew I'd marry her. Underneath, the strange line of letters and numbers. SS 445 I traced the words with my finger. The ink had faded a little, but his handwriting was as neat as ever, steady, careful, full of intention. For a moment, I was 20 years old again, standing under the string lights at that summer dance in 1955. I could almost hear the band playing, smell the lake air, see Charles walking toward me in that white shirt he always said made him look older. He'd smiled, nervous but certain, and told me, "I knew you were it, Eve." That was the night everything began. I blinked and came back to the present. The light flickered and the memories faded, leaving only the code. I read it over and over. SS 4457 CH0815DS. It looked deliberate, not random at all. The letter CH could be for Charles Hartman. The last two, DS, maybe, mine? No, my name was Evelyn, not Dorothy, but my middle name, Susan. ES, not DS. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Still, it didn't feel meaningless. Charles had been a banker his whole life. He thought in numbers, in patterns. If he hid this, there was a reason. I got up and went to his old desk in the bedroom. It still smelled faintly of his aftershave and paper. I sat down, turned on the lamp, and pulled out his old notebooks and files. He kept everything: tax returns, mortgage papers, investment records. Every folder was labeled in his handwriting. I started flipping through them, searching for anything that matched the code. Account numbers, security forms, anything. Hours passed. Nothing. By midnight, my eyes were tired, but I couldn't stop. I was sure there was something I was missing. Finally, I reached for the phone. I hesitated before dialing, but curiosity got the better of me. I called David. He answered on the third ring. "Mom, it's late." His tone was flat, almost annoyed. "I found something," I said. "Inside your father's watch." There was a pause on the line. I could hear him breathing. "What do you mean?" There was a note, something he wrote. A code. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. No longer bored, but sharp, alert. "What kind of code?" "I don't know yet. Letters and numbers. It might mean something." He exhaled quickly. "Mom, I think you're letting your imagination run wild. Dad didn't hide codes and watches." I almost agreed, just to end the call, but then I remembered how fast. He'd responded when I mentioned it. His tone wasn't disbelief, it was concern. "I'll figure it out," I said. "Maybe I should come by tomorrow," he offered suddenly. "I can help you look through Dad's papers. I know how to handle that stuff." Yesterday he told me to stop living in the past. Now he wanted to help me go through it. "That's not necessary," I said. "I'm fine." "Mom," he insisted, "just tell me exactly what it said." "I wrote it down," I lied. "It's just numbers, nothing special." He hesitated. "All right, but don't overthink it. Try to get some sleep." When I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment. His sudden interest bothered me. For months, David had treated his father's things like junk. Now, one mention of a code, and he wanted to see everything. I went back to the table and stared at the note again. The paper was soft from age, almost fragile. SS 4457 CH0815DS. I whispered the letters out loud, slowly. SSCH0815DS. That was August 15th, our wedding anniversary. I felt a small jolt in my chest. Could Charles have built this code around our life? If CH was his initials and 08 was our anniversary, maybe DS was something else. Maybe mine, or maybe a clue I hadn't recognized yet. I grabbed my old laptop and opened a browser. I typed the code into the search bar, just in case. A dozen random results came up, shipping numbers, vehicle models, nothing that made sense. Then I tried typing the letters separately. SS4457. The top results were about Swiss companies, banking codes, and serial numbers. Swiss. Charles's Rolex was a Swiss watch. Maybe it wasn't a coincidence. I clicked on one of the links. It led to a website called Secure Solutions Investment Management. The homepage looked plain, but at the top corner there was a login box that said client number. My hands were shaking. I typed the full code, SS4457CH0815DS, and pressed enter. For a second, nothing happened. Then a new page appeared. It said, valid account number. Please enter password. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Password. What would Charles have used? Something simple, something personal? I tried our wedding date, or 8151958. Nothing. I tried his birthday, still nothing. Then I looked back at the note. Evelyn's birthday, July 15th, 1955, the day I knew I'd marry her. That was the answer. Not my actual birthday, but the day we met. I typed 071Y5 and pressed enter. The screen blinked once, then it opened to a new page with a single line at the top. Account balance, 2470, 296.73. I covered my mouth with my hand. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Charles had hidden nearly $3 million in his secret account, and for 43 years, I'd never known. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing, the glow of the screen lighting the room. The numbers blurred as I tried to understand what they meant. Why would he hide? Something like this for me? I whispered to the empty room. What did you hide, Charles? And why? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those letters and numbers glowing in the dark, like they were waiting for me to solve them. Around midnight, I gave up on trying to rest and went into Charles's office. That room had barely been touched since the funeral. The smell of his aftershave still hung in the air, mixed with paper and old wood polish. Everything was where he'd left it. The lamp on the corner of the desk, the pen holder lined up by height, the chair pushed in exactly 3 inches from the edge. Charles had been the kind of man who needed order. It was how he made sense of the world. I turned on the small lamp. The light fell over his desk, and the shadows of the drawers looked deeper than usual. I opened the top one. Inside were neatly stacked folders labeled with dates and account names, all written in his tidy handwriting. I ran my finger along the edges of the papers. For years, I'd teased him about being too organized, but now I was grateful for it. Halfway down the second drawer, I found a black notebook. It was worn, the corners bent from use. Inside were columns of numbers, notes, and calculations. At the bottom of the last page, my breath caught. In blue ink, next to his usual handwriting, was the line, SS40457 CH0815DS, Secure Solutions. He'd written it there deliberately. It wasn't random at all. My hands shook as I traced the letters. Secure Solutions. That was the name of the website I had seen earlier when I entered the code. I turned on his old computer, the one he'd used for years, but that I hadn't touched since he passed away. It took forever to start, humming like a tired machine, but eventually the desktop appeared. I typed Secure Solutions Investment Management into the browser. The same site loaded, simple and cold, a white background with a single login box. I entered the code again, SS4457 C808WIM40S, and pressed enter. For a second, the cursor spun. Then the words appeared, access granted. My heart started pounding. The page refreshed and numbers filled the screen. At the top, in bold letters, it read, current account balance, 2,470,296.73, almost $3 million. I just sat there staring. The glow from the screen reflected off my glasses and made my eyes sting. My husband, who'd spent 43 years telling me we had to budget every penny, had hidden nearly $3 million in a private account, and never said a word. I thought of all the times we'd argued over groceries, over bills, over small things that didn't seem small then. I thought of the nights he stayed up late, balancing the books, the times he told me we couldn't afford new furniture or a vacation. I'd believed him every single time. I leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked softly under me. My hands were trembling, not from anger yet, but from disbelief. Why would he hide this from me? I clicked through the site, scanning the transaction. List. The deposits went back decades. Some were small, 500 here, 1,000 there. Others were larger, tens of thousands at a time. Each entry had tiny notes beside it: inheritance, real estate sale, investment dividends. The earliest one dated back to 1982. That was 3 years after David was born. I scrolled faster. The pattern was methodical. Charles had been transferring money bit by bit for over 40 years. None of it appeared on the bank statements I'd seen before. It was like he'd created a second life on paper, one I knew nothing about. I pressed my hands to my forehead. Maybe he'd been saving for us. A surprise, a safety net, something noble. But if that were true, why hide it? Why not tell me? The screen light flickered and the numbers blurred. I could almost hear his voice in my head, steady and calm, the way he used to speak when he wanted to explain something complicated. You just have to trust the system, Eve. But trust was exactly what felt broken now. I opened the account summary again and looked at the total: $2,470,000. It didn't look real. My mind ran through every possibility. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe someone else's account. But no, his handwriting was right there in that notebook. He had written the code. He had left it for me. I turned off the lamp and stared at the reflection of the screen on the dark window. My own face looked back at me, tired, older than I remembered. Charles had trusted numbers more than people. Maybe that's why he kept this hidden, locked away in a system that only he could understand. Maybe he thought he was protecting me, or maybe he didn't trust me at all. The idea made my stomach twist. I closed the notebook, turned off the computer, and sat there in the dark for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, steady, indifferent. After a while, I whispered to the empty room, "My husband hid a fortune from me." The words felt heavy in the air, too real to take back. I don't even remember clicking the file. One moment I was staring at the balance on the screen, and the next, a small video window popped open. It was labeled for Evelyn. My breath caught. I hesitated before pressing play, afraid of what I might see or hear. Then I clicked. Charles's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his office, the one at the bank. His hair was thinner, his shirt wrinkled like he'd been there all night. The date in the corner read 3 months before he died. His voice came through steady, but his eyes looked tired. "If you're watching this, I'm gone," he said. "The money isn't mine. It's my father's." I felt my throat tighten. My father-in-law had died when David was only 2 years old. Whatever money he'd left us had gone to pay off the mortgage decades ago, Charles went on. He made me promise to keep it safe, Eve, to protect it. He didn't trust banks here after what happened to him in the 70s. I moved it offshore in 1981. It was supposed to stay hidden until our family was in danger. He stopped to rub his face with both hands, the same gesture he always made when he was thinking too hard. His wedding ring glinted in the office light. "I know this must sound strange," he said, "but it's not random, Eve. If you see this, it means the danger is close." The word danger made my stomach twist. I looked around the room, half expecting someone to be standing behind me. The air felt heavier, like the walls were listening. Charles leaned closer to the camera. "You'll find everything you need in the account. The passwords, the documentation, it's all there. I hope you never have to use it. But if you do, you'll understand why I kept it secret." He paused, took a deep breath, and smiled weakly. "You were always the strong one, Eve. You just never believed it." The video ended there. The screen froze on his face for a few seconds, then went black. I sat in the dark, staring at my reflection on the blank monitor. My eyes were wet, but I didn't even realize I was crying until a tear hit the keyboard. Danger. What danger? For years, Charles had been so careful, so distant sometimes. I'd always thought it was just work stress, but maybe it had been something else. Maybe he'd known something he couldn't tell me. I turned on the lamp and looked around the room. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The tidy desk, the framed photo of us at Lake Michigan, the half-empty bottle of cologne still sitting on the shelf. Nothing looked out of place, but suddenly the house felt different, like it wasn't just mine anymore. I replayed the last months of his life in my head. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the way he'd started locking his briefcase. Whenever I asked what he was working on, he'd smile and say, "Just paperwork." He'd been preparing for something. A flash of memory hit me. One night last winter, he'd come home after midnight. I'd been half asleep on the couch when I heard the door open. He looked pale, distracted. When I asked what was wrong, he said, "Just work, Eve. I'm almost done." I didn't think much of it at the time. Now I wasn't so sure. I opened the desk drawers again, searching for anything else. USB drives, documents, hidden compartments. Every drawer was perfectly neat, but my hands were shaking as I went through them. I found a folder labeled Investments, Private. Inside were property deeds and handwritten notes, but what caught my eye were a few business cards paper-clipped together. One name stood out: Thomas Chen, private investigator. My pulse quickened. I didn't know Charles had ever hired a private investigator. The card had an address downtown and a phone number. I stared at it for a long moment, thinking about what kind of danger would make my husband hire someone like that. I turned back to the dark computer screen. Charles's reflection stared back at me. His last words echoed in my head. If you see this, it means the danger is close. Was he talking about money? About someone trying to take it? Or was it something even closer to home? I thought about David and Lydia, about the way they'd looked at me in the kitchen when I asked about the watch, about David's sudden interest when I mentioned the code. I pressed my hands flat against the desk, trying to steady my breathing. My own son wouldn't hurt me. He wouldn't do something like that. But the thought lingered, cold and quiet. For years, I'd believed our family was simple. No secrets, no lies, just a regular life. But sitting there, surrounded by Charles's hidden papers and that black screen, I realized how little I really knew. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could hear Charles's voice again. Soft, but firm. If you're watching this, it means the danger is close. When I opened them, the house seemed darker. Even the air felt different. The screen was still black, and my reflection stared back at me, pale and uncertain. I could see the question forming on my lips before I even spoke it. I whispered, "Was the danger our own son?" The sound of my voice broke the silence, and for the first time in months, I was afraid to be alone. After watching the video, I couldn't stop thinking about what Charles had said. The danger is close. Those words kept replaying in my mind like an alarm I couldn't shut off. I spent the next morning sitting at his desk, going through every file, every folder, every piece of paper I could find. I opened the online account again, scrolling through the transaction history. The numbers blurred together after a while, but then something caught my eye. Most of the deposits were old, years, even decades old, but the recent ones looked different. There were large withdrawals made just a few weeks before Charles died. Each transfer went to the same name, Hartman Investments, LLC. At first, I didn't recognize it. Then the name started to sink in. Hartman. My own last name. Our name. My chest tightened. I picked up my phone and dialed my nephew, Danny. He worked in real estate downtown. He'd always been close to Charles, closer than David had been in recent years. If anyone knew about local companies, it would be him. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm as always. "Aunt Eve? Hey, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Listen, honey, I need to ask you something. Have you ever heard of a company called Hartman Investments, LLC? There was a pause. I could hear typing in the background, then silence. "Actually, yeah," Danny said finally. "They've been active lately, buying up a bunch of properties around the city. Mostly older houses, all cash deals." "Why? You thinking of selling?" I swallowed hard. "No, I found the name in one of your uncle's records." Another pause. "That's strange. Most of their transactions are recent, like really recent, within the last year." He hesitated. "Do you want me to check who owns it?" "Yes, please." "Give me a few minutes," he said. "I'll call you back." When the line went dead, I stared at the computer screen, at the name repeating down the page. Hartman Investments, LLC. Every transaction was labeled as asset transfer or property liquidation. Charles had been selling off investments, converting them to cash. But why would he move that money into a company with our name? The minutes felt like hours. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for the phone to ring again. When it finally did, I almost dropped it. Danny's voice was quiet when he spoke. "Aunt Eve, you're not going to like this. The company's registered under David's name, David Hartman. He's listed as the sole owner." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just sat there, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles hurt. "David?" I whispered. "Yeah, and Aunt Eve. Some of these purchases are big. He's been spending a lot of money, like way more than I'd expect. It looks like he's been buying properties, flipping them, maybe taking loans against them too. But all cash up front, it's unusual." Thank you. Danny, I said quietly, that's all I needed to know. When I hung up, I stared at the phone in my hand until the screen went dark. Then I set it down on the desk and felt my whole body go still. David, my son, the same boy who used to climb into bed with me during thunderstorms, who cried when he broke his father's glasses at age 12, who promised me after his grandfather's funeral that he'd always take care of me. I could still see that day so clearly. David had been 8 years old, standing beside me as they lowered his grandfather's casket into the ground. His small hand gripped mine tightly. "I'll protect you, Mom," he said. I believed him. I always did. Now that same boy had turned into a man who stole from his father before the ground over his grave had even settled. The tears came before I could stop them. I covered my mouth to keep from making a sound, but it didn't matter. The room was already filled with the kind of silence that swallows you whole. I looked around the office at all the neat rows of folders, the stacks of paperwork, the faint smell of Charles's cologne still clinging to the air. All this time, I thought the danger Charles mentioned was something outside our family, some financial threat, some stranger trying to take what was his, but he'd been talking about something much closer. Our son. I opened the account page again, scrolling through the latest transactions. The last one was dated 2 weeks before Charles died. A withdrawal of $25,000 marked emergency liquidation. My hands trembled as I thought about what that could mean. Had Charles found out what David was doing? Was he trying to move the money before David could reach it? I thought back to Charles's tired eyes in that video, to the fear in his voice. If you're watching this, it means the danger is close. Now I understood. He had known. He had known his own son was stealing from him. I reached for the picture frame on his desk, the one from our wedding day. I wiped the dust off the glass and looked at our younger selves smiling back at me. "You tried to warn me, didn't you?" I whispered. "You knew." I set the frame back down and leaned against the chair, trying to steady my breathing. The grief I'd been carrying for months suddenly turned into something sharper, anger mixed with heartbreak. Losing Charles had been painful enough. Realizing that the son we raised together was capable of betraying us both, that broke something deeper. I wiped my eyes, straightened the papers on the desk, and whispered again, "Charles warned me. You knew." And for the first time since he died, I didn't feel helpless. I felt awake. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I hadn't slept much, just stared at the ceiling most of the night, thinking about everything I'd learned. The secret account, the video, the proof that my husband had known our own son was the danger he warned me about. By the time I heard the car pull into the driveway, I was sitting at Charles's desk with the folder open in front of me. I had placed a few papers neatly on top, the way Charles used to do when he wanted someone to notice them. A few seconds later, I heard Lydia's voice calling from the hall. "Evelyn, are you up? We just wanted to say goodbye before we head to the airport." I took a slow breath and said, "In here." They appeared in the doorway a moment later, both dressed for travel, Lydia in her designer coat and sunglasses pushed up on her head, David with a small suitcase by his side. He looked restless, but Lydia's expression was careful, polite. I smiled faintly. "Off to Italy, huh?" "Yes," Lydia said. We thought we'd stop by first, check on you." Her tone was sweet, but I could hear the calculation underneath it. I gestured toward the papers on the desk. "I've been sorting through your father's things," I said. "There's still so much I didn't know about." David stepped closer, pretending to glance casually at the folders. "What kind of things?" "Oh, just old financial records," I said, keeping my voice light. "Actually, I found something a little odd. Apparently, your father had a small investment account I didn't know about." The change in the room was instant. Lydia stopped moving. David's smile froze. "What kind of account?" he asked after a pause, trying to sound casual, but his voice caught on the last word. I leaned back in the chair and looked up at them. "The kind that exposes every lie you've told." David's face went pale. Lydia blinked rapidly, her lips parting slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly. "Don't you?" I said. My hands didn't shake as I picked up one of the papers. "Because it seems your husband has been busy. $180,000 in gambling debts to offshore betting sites, several fraudulent loans using fake income statements, and apparently plans to have me declared legally incompetent." Lydia's hand went to her chest. "That's ridiculous." David interrupted, his voice louder than before. "Where did you get that?" I stood slowly, meeting his eyes. "From the same man your father hired when he realized what you were doing. A private investigator named Thomas Chen. Does that name ring a bell? He didn't answer. His jaw clenched, his throat moved like he was trying to swallow something sharp. You should have stopped when he was alive, I said quietly. But you didn't, did you? You waited until he was gone. Lydia stepped forward, her voice trembling. You don't understand. We were trying to help you. I laughed, not loudly, but the sound came out dry and bitter. Help me? By selling your father's watch? By trying to take control of my finances? By lying to everyone and telling them I'm losing my mind? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. David finally spoke, his tone lower now, almost pleading. Mom, listen. Things got out of hand. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought Dad was hiding something from us. I thought it wasn't fair. Not fair, I said. He spent his life working for us, for you, and you sold his watch like it was nothing. You stole from him, from me. He looked down at the floor, the silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, You don't know everything. Dad wasn't perfect. No, I said, but he was honest, and he protected me even after he died. From you. I reached into the folder and pulled out the investigator's report. The paper crackled in my hand as I placed it on the desk in front of him. His eyes moved quickly across the page, his expression changing from denial to shock to something close to panic. Lydia leaned over his shoulder, reading. This isn't real, she said weakly. Oh, it's real, I said. Every word, every debt, every call you made, every plan you discussed. He recorded everything. David looked up sharply. What do you mean recorded? I tilted my head. Your father wired the house. He heard every conversation you had in this room. Every time you mentioned putting me in a nursing home, every time you discussed his accounts, every joke you made about the old lady losing it. He heard it all. Lydia's face turned red. You can't prove that. I smiled. You're welcome to try me. For a moment, none of them spoke. David's shoulders slumped. The fight seemed to leave him. Lydia was the first to recover, straightening her coat. This is insane, she snapped. We don't have to listen to this. David grabbed her arm. Lydia, stop. But I wasn't done. I took a step closer to him. Your father knew everything, David. And now, I said softly, so do I. He looked up at me, eyes wet, his mouth trembling like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Lydia's glare shifted between us, but even she didn't look confident anymore. They turned to leave, David still silent. Lydia muttering something about me being paranoid. When they reached the door, I said one more thing. They stopped. Next time you try to take something that doesn't belong to you, I said, make sure you know who you're stealing from. Lydia's voice cracked as she said, this isn't over. I nodded. You're right. It's just beginning. The door closed behind them with a sharp click, leaving me alone in the room. I sat back down at Charles's desk, the silence returning like a blanket. My hands were steady now. I looked at his photo on the corner of the desk, his calm, knowing smile, and whispered, Charles knew everything, and now, so do I. 2 days passed after David and Lydia's visit. I didn't hear from them, but I wasn't surprised. The silence wasn't peace, it was strategy. My son had never handled losing well. That morning, I was in the kitchen making tea when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the window, I saw a black sedan parked out front and 2 people in business suits standing on my porch. The woman held a leather briefcase, the man a tablet. I dried my hands and opened the door halfway. Mrs. Hartman, the woman said with a polished smile. I'm Catherine Wells from Wells, Morrison and Associates. This is my colleague, David Kim. May we come in for a moment? I hesitated, studying their faces. They looked polite, confident, and exactly the kind of people who could make bad news sound reasonable. What's this about? I asked. It's regarding your son, Mr. David Hartman, the woman said. He's asked us to assist with a few legal matters concerning your estate. The word estate made my stomach turn. I let them in, but didn't invite them to sit. Go on, I said. Catherine smiled again, the kind of smile that probably cost $300 an hour. Your son is worried about you, Mrs. Hartman. He mentioned that you've been under some emotional stress and may be struggling to manage certain financial responsibilities. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Just once, sharp and humorless. Is that so? I said. Funny. He couldn't manage his own. That wiped the smile from her face. She cleared her throat and pressed on. We understand this is a difficult time, and our goal is to make things easier for you. We've prepared a few documents that would allow your son to assist you in handling your finances. Temporarily, of course. Power of attorney, nothing permanent. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a folder, and placed it gently on the table like it was a gift instead of a threat. I stared at the folder for a moment, then looked up at her. And what happens if I don't sign it? The man, David Kim, spoke for the first time. His voice was soft but firm. Your son may have to pursue other legal options to ensure your well-being. He's concerned that some recent actions, like accessing offshore accounts, could be viewed as financially erratic. Erratic? I repeated. For checking an account that belonged to my husband? Mrs. Hartman, Catherine said smoothly, please understand. This is standard procedure. We want to avoid the court getting involved. These decisions are best kept within the family. Family. That word had become meaningless lately. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on the table. You can tell my son something for me. Catherine blinked. Of course. Tell him threats only work on people who have less evidence than I do. Her smile faltered for the first time. I'm sorry. I didn't repeat myself. Instead, I reached across the table for Charles's old address book, the one he'd left me in a sealed envelope with a note that said, "For when you need help." I flipped through the pages until I found the name, Raymond Kwan, private investigator. I could feel both lawyers watching me, their polite confidence beginning to crack. I picked up the phone, dialed the number, and pressed it to my ear. The line rang once, twice. Then a man's voice came on, low and steady. Mrs. Hartman, he said before I could even introduce myself, I've been expecting your call. I froze, the receiver still pressed to my ear. You have? Yes, ma'am, he said. Charles told me that one day you might need my help. Behind me, I could hear Catherine clearing her throat, pretending to shuffle papers to cover her unease. Mrs. Hartman, she said, perhaps this isn't the time. I held up a hand to silence her. Mr. Kwan, I said into the phone, my voice steady. I think that time has come. I understand, he replied. Would you like to meet this afternoon? I still have your husband's case files. Case files? Yes, ma'am. Everything he left in my care. He was very thorough. For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight. I looked up and met Catherine's gaze. Her smile was gone now. She looked wary, uncertain. That would be perfect, I said finally. Text me the address. Already done, Raymond said. See you soon, Mrs. Hartman. I hung up the phone and turned back to the two lawyers. You were saying something about helping me manage my finances? Catherine closed her briefcase without another word. We'll inform your son that you're consulting your own legal counsel. That's a good idea, I said calmly. Tell him my lawyer is better. They exchanged glances, murmured polite goodbyes, and left without looking back. When the door clicked shut, I stood still for a long time, the phone still in my hand. I didn't know what was waiting for me in those files Raymond mentioned, but I knew one thing for sure. Charles had planned for this. He had known everything long before I did. As I put the phone down, a strange calm came over me. The fear was gone. In its place was focus. I whispered to the empty room, You planned it all, didn't you, Charles? And somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear his voice again, quiet and certain. I told you, Eve. You're stronger than you think. The next afternoon, I drove downtown to meet Raymond Kwan. His office was in one of those modern glass buildings that looked too clean for comfort, cold, perfect, and silent. When I walked in, the air smelled like coffee and new carpet. The receptionist smiled and led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Raymond was already there, sitting at the table with a stack of folders in front of him. He stood as I entered, offering a warm handshake. Mrs. Hartman, he said, I'm very sorry for your loss. Charles was, one of a kind. Thank you, I said quietly. He motioned for me to sit, then opened the first folder. Your husband came to see me about 6 months before he passed away. He was worried about something, specifically about your son. He hired me to prepare what he called a defense package. I frowned. Defense? Against what? Raymond gave a small, sad smile. He thought David might try to take control of your finances after his death. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then Charles brought me proof. He spread several documents across the table, Bank statements, photographs, typed reports. My hands trembled as I reached for one of them. The first page showed a list of transactions from David's accounts, loans, gambling websites, and credit card charges I didn't recognize. Raymond turned another page, revealing photos of David meeting with men in business suits outside what looked like a casino. I followed him for several weeks, Raymond explained. Your husband wanted confirmation before confronting him. When I showed him the evidence, he didn't get angry. He just looked tired. I nodded slowly. That sounded like Charles. He was never one for loud reactions. He preferred quiet solutions. Raymond handed me a sealed envelope. This is from him. He asked me to give it to you if you ever contacted me. My fingers shook as I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter dated a week before he died. The ink was smudged in places as if he'd been writing in a hurry. He will come for you, Eve. When he does, use this evidence, and remember, justice isn't revenge. My throat tightened as I read those words. The paper blurred as tears filled my eyes. He knew, I whispered. He knew this was going to happen. Raymond nodded gently. He did. Charles wasn't paranoid, he was careful. He wanted to make sure you had everything you needed to protect yourself legally and emotionally. I looked at the piles of evidence on the table, recordings, photos, letters. There were even printed transcripts of conversations between David and Lydia that had been captured in my own kitchen. How did he even get all this? I asked. He had your house wired, Raymond said simply. Legally. It was his property, so he had the right. Every conversation in the living room, kitchen, and even the office was recorded for 6 months. I stared at him, speechless. He was listening? The whole time? Yes, Raymond said softly. He heard everything. Every discussion about your mental state, every mention of his accounts, every plan they made to have you declared incompetent. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The idea of Charles sitting quietly somewhere, listening to those conversations, broke my heart. He must have known exactly how painful it would be to hear. Raymond continued. He wanted you to have a choice, Mrs. Hartman. That's why he asked me to show you everything before we move forward. A choice? I repeated. He nodded. Between mercy and justice, you can forgive your son or you can press charges. Charles made sure you have enough evidence to destroy him in court if that's what you decide. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. The city stretched out below us, bright and calm, completely unaware of the storm that had torn through my life. Forgive him? The thought alone felt impossible. But destroying him? That didn't feel right either. David was still my son, even if he'd become a stranger to me. Raymond spoke again, his tone gentle. You don't have to decide today. Take your time. But know that whatever you choose, you'll be protected. Your husband made sure of that. I looked back at the letter in my hands, the handwriting that I knew better than my own. The ink had bled slightly near the bottom, forming a faint shadow of his words. Justice isn't revenge. I closed my eyes for a moment, hearing his voice in my mind. Calm, patient, steady. When I opened them again, the room seemed brighter. The afternoon sun had moved lower, spilling light across the floor and onto the table where the papers lay. I stood slowly, still holding the letter. Raymond looked at me, waiting. I wiped the last tear from my cheek and said quietly, He wanted me to choose, didn't he? Raymond nodded once. Yes, mercy or justice. I looked at the sunlight reflecting on the window, the city glowing beneath it, and I finally knew my answer. Then I choose both, I said. The words hung in the air between us, firm and final. Raymond didn't respond right away. He just smiled faintly and began to close the folders one by one, as if sealing away the past. And as the sun set over the city, I felt something shift inside me, not just anger or grief, but strength. For the first time since Charles's death, I wasn't afraid anymore. The morning started like any other. The air was crisp and the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. I stood by the window, holding my mug, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. The world felt quiet for once. Too quiet. Then I heard it. The sound of engines loud and close. Tires on gravel. A flash of dark blue outside the window. When I looked up, I saw them. 3 black SUVs parked across the street right in front of David's house. A group of men in jackets marked FBI were already moving toward the front door. Within seconds, the whole street came alive. Sirens shouting, the hum of police radios. Neighbors stepped outside in their robes, clutching coffee cups, whispering to each other. Across the road, Lydia, or Ashley, as she now liked to be called, appeared at the window, confusion quickly turning to panic. David came out onto the porch a moment later, barefoot, his shirt half buttoned. The agents were calm, professional. One of them handed him a document, another started reading from a warrant. My phone rang before I even moved away from the window. "Mom," David's voice came through, breathless and shaking. "Mom, what did you do?" I didn't answer right away. I watched from behind the curtain as agents walked him back inside, their voices firm but polite. Finally, I said, "What your father always did, David. Protect what's right." He made a sound like a gasp mixed with a sob. "You don't understand. This will destroy us." "You destroyed yourself," I said quietly. "I just showed them where to look." Before he could respond, another voice cut through the line. Lydia's, sharp and shrill. "You vindictive witch," she screamed. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started." I looked down at my cup of coffee, the steam rising in soft curls. "No, dear," I said calmly. "Just a woman who learned from the best." There was shouting in the background, voices, footsteps, the clatter of drawers being opened. I could hear Lydia arguing with someone, demanding to call her lawyer. David tried to say something, but the call broke off. I put the phone down and went back to the window. The FBI agents were carrying out boxes now. Files, computers, hard drives. 2 men were leading David down the front steps, his hands behind his back. Lydia followed a moment later, still yelling, her perfect hair tangled and her face red with fury. The neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, whispering, pointing. Cameras flashed from phones. It was like watching a movie. Except this time, I wasn't the victim. For a moment, I thought about stepping outside, about walking across the street and looking David in the eyes. But I stayed where I was. There was nothing left to say. I'd given Raymond the go-ahead the day before. He had taken everything Charles had left, the files, the recordings, the documentation, and passed it to the authorities. Fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, elder abuse. The evidence spoke for itself. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. Exactly what Charles had told me to do, I turned from the window long enough to pour myself another cup of coffee. My hands didn't shake this time. The noise outside grew louder as they loaded boxes into the cars. My phone buzzed again, a text from Raymond. "It's done. They'll be arraigned this afternoon. You won't have to worry anymore." I typed back a simple reply, "Thank you." As I set the phone down, my eyes landed on Charles's picture hanging above the mantel. His smile was the same, calm, knowing, steady. "You'd have liked this part," I whispered. "You always did believe in poetic justice." Outside, the scene was winding down. The agents were closing the SUVs. Lydia was still yelling something at one of them, but her words didn't carry. David kept his head down, refusing to look up. For a brief moment, I remembered him as a little boy, standing on the front porch, holding a toy airplane, waving at his father when Charles came home from work. That image had lived in my heart for years, but now it felt like a photograph from someone else's life. Beautiful, but no longer mine to keep. I went back to the window one last time. The morning sun had risen higher now, bright and golden against the cold air. The agents led David and Lydia to separate cars. David turned slightly, as if he felt me watching, but he didn't look toward the house. He just got in quietly, the door closing behind him with a dull thud. As the SUVs pulled away, I lifted my mug and took a slow sip. The coffee was still warm. My reflection in the glass looked older, maybe a little harder, but steady. The street fell quiet again. The neighbors drifted back inside. The sound of the engines faded into the distance. I stayed by the window for a while longer, the mug cradled in both hands. Not a single tear fell. Charles had been right all along. Justice wasn't revenge. It was simply setting things back where they belonged. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe I could breathe again. The camera would have pulled back then, slowly through the kitchen window, the quiet house, the woman standing with her coffee, the light spilling over her shoulders. And outside, down the street, 2 black SUVs disappearing into the city morning. I didn't move. I just held the cup tighter, watching the steam rise until it faded. It had been 3 weeks since the FBI came. The neighborhood had gone quiet again, though people still looked at me differently when I walked to the mailbox. Some smiled kindly, others whispered. I didn't mind. For the first time in months, the silence in my house felt peaceful. That morning, I was reading the paper at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me, sharp, unexpected. I set down my coffee and walked to the door. Standing outside was a man in his 60s, dressed neatly in a gray suit. His hair was silver at the temples, and his expression was calm but serious. In his hands, he held a small blue velvet box. "Mrs. Hartman?" he said. "Yes." "My name is Edward Banks," he said, extending a card. "I was hired by your husband about 20 years ago." I blinked, unsure I'd heard correctly. "By Charles?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I've been part of something he called Operation Timepiece." The name made my chest tighten. "Operation what?" He smiled gently. "Your husband was a very careful man. He asked me to watch over an item for him, a Rolex watch. He said if it ever resurfaced, I should make sure it found its way back to you." My hand went to my mouth. "You have the watch?" He lifted the velvet box slightly. "Yes, ma'am. It came across my radar recently when it was sold at Golden State Pawn. I bought it back immediately." I stepped aside. "Please come in." Edward followed me into the living room and placed the box on the coffee table. I sat down across from him, my heart pounding. For a moment, I just stared at it, the deep blue velvet, the faint marks on the edges. He opened the box slowly, almost ceremonially. There it was. Charles's watch, the gold catching the light, the face scratched just slightly near the edge. I reached out and touched it. "He wore this every day," I said softly. "I know," Edward said. He told me it was the one thing he trusted more than anything else, because it always told the truth. I smiled faintly. That sounds like him. He hesitated for a moment, then turned the watch over in his hands. "Mrs. Hartman, your husband left very specific instructions about this watch. He asked me to show you something." He pressed a small, almost invisible button on the back. I heard a click. The back plate lifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment smaller than a postage stamp. Inside was a micro SD card. I froze. "What is that?" Edward carefully removed it and set it on the table. He said that if the time ever came, if your son tried to harm you or claim you were unfit, you should watch what's on this card. It would prove everything. My hands were shaking as I took it. "How long have you had this?" "Since 2005, he said. I didn't know what was on it, only that it was part of your husband's plan." He handed me a small laptop from his briefcase. "He left me this too. It's configured to open the files automatically." I took a deep breath and inserted the card. The screen flickered to life and a list of video files appeared, each labeled with a date. The newest one was from 7 months ago. I clicked play. The image was grainy, like security footage. It showed my own kitchen, the same table, the same curtains, and at that table sat David and Lydia. Lydia's voice was clear. "If we can get her declared incompetent, the estate transfers automatically." David nodded, rubbing his forehead. "It won't be hard. She's already talking to herself half the time. We just need one doctor to sign off." My stomach turned. I hadn't known Charles was recording back then. He'd heard this conversation while I was upstairs grieving, thinking my son was helping me. Lydia continued, her tone sharp. "Once it's done, we sell the house, close the accounts, and move. It's what your father would have wanted." David laughed bitterly. "Yeah, right. My father wanted control. This is balance." I couldn't watch anymore. I paused the video, covering my mouth. My hands felt cold, my skin tight. Edward's voice broke the silence gently. "There are more files," he said. "Conversations, financial records, even audio logs your husband kept. He built a case long before the authorities ever saw it." I looked at the frozen frame on the screen. My son, my daughter-in-law, sitting in the same room I was in now, planning to destroy me. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Then, slowly, I pressed play again. The sound of Lydia's voice filled the room once more, casual, cruel, confident. Every word was proof. When the video ended, I sat back, staring at the dark screen. The tears came again, but this time they didn't feel like weakness. They felt like release. Charles had been right about everything. He hadn't just hidden money. He had hidden protection for me. I looked at Edward. "You've been guarding this for 20 years? He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Your husband said you'd need it someday. I'm just glad I was still around to deliver it." I picked up the watch, feeling its familiar weight in my hand. The ticking was steady, almost comforting. "You were still fighting for me, Charles," I whispered, "even after death." Edward gave a small smile. "He loved you very much, Mrs. Hartman. He wanted to make sure you'd never face this world alone." I nodded, tears spilling silently. For the first time, I believed him. The next morning, I met Raymond again. I brought the SD card that Edward had given me. He already had his computer ready, papers spread across the desk. "Your husband was a planner," Raymond said as he inserted the card. "He didn't just prepare evidence, he built protection." On the screen appeared a folder I hadn't noticed before, Protection Plan. Inside were several legal documents with signatures and seals. Raymond opened one marked Asset Transfer Protocol. He read aloud, "In the event that David Hartman initiates any legal action challenging the competency, estate, or financial authority of Evelyn Hartman, all corporate assets under Hartman Investments LLC shall be transferred immediately to the Chicago Children's Hospital Fund." I stared at him. "Transferred? As in donated?" He nodded. "Every dollar, every property. It's already happened. The moment your son filed his petition, the clause activated automatically." I sat back, stunned. So Charles made sure if David tried to take from me, he'd lose everything. "Exactly," Raymond said with a faint smile. "Your husband built the perfect trap." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He turned his son's greed into a lesson. Raymond nodded. He said it was poetic justice, the kind that builds something good out of something terrible. The hospital already received the transfer confirmation this morning. I pressed my hands together, trying to steady the emotions rising in my chest. For months I'd lived in fear, afraid of losing everything, afraid of being alone. Now, somehow, Charles had turned all that fear into safety. "He really thought of everything," I said softly. "He did," Raymond replied. "He knew you'd need protection not from strangers, but from family. That's why he built a plan, not just a will." I looked down at the paper. It was strange. Victory didn't feel sweet. It felt sad. Tragic. Necessary. When I left his office, the afternoon sun was spilling through the glass, lighting the street in gold. I reached into my purse and pulled out Charles's watch. The face glinted in the light, the second hand ticking steady and calm. I turned it over, pressing the small latch. The hidden compartment clicked open. Inside was nothing now, just a tiny empty space where all his secrets had lived. I whispered, "You really did it, didn't you, Charles? You turned pain into protection." The light caught the gold again, reflecting off my wrist. I could almost hear his voice in my mind. "Justice isn't revenge, Eve. It's love. Doing what's right." The second hand kept moving, smooth and certain, marking time like it always had. The rhythm of justice and love beating together, steady and unbreakable. 6 months passed. The house by the lake was quiet now. The kind of quiet that feels peaceful, not lonely. I'd learned to enjoy small things again. The smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of birds outside my window, the way the light hit the water in the afternoon. That evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, a young woman stood there holding a small bouquet of flowers. Her eyes were familiar, Charles's eyes, soft, steady, and kind. "Grandma Evelyn?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's me, Sophie." It took me a moment to recognize her. The last time I'd seen Sophie, she was still in college, standing beside her father at Charles's funeral. Lydia had made sure to keep her away after that. I smiled. "Sophie, honey, of course I remember you. Come in." She hesitated before stepping inside. "I know I should have called, but I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "I'll always want to see you," I said simply. We sat down in the kitchen and I poured her a cup of tea. The smell of roasted chicken filled the room, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel empty. "I heard about everything," Sophie said quietly. "Dad, what he did to you. I'm so sorry." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You have nothing to be sorry for." Her eyes filled with tears. "I feel like I should have known something was wrong. He kept asking weird questions about Grandpa's money. I just thought he was grieving. But after he and Mom were arrested, She stopped, wiping her eyes. "I didn't know how to face you." I squeezed her hand gently. "You're here now. That's what matters." We ate dinner together, talking like no time had passed. She told me about her new job teaching 3rd grade, about her fiancé, about how hard it was to visit her father in prison. "I still love him," she said. "But I'm angry too. He hurt everyone. I don't know how to forgive him." I looked at her for a moment before answering. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what someone did. It just means you stop letting it control you. She frowned softly. How can you not hate him, Grandma? After everything? I took a slow breath. Because hate means he still controls me. I choose peace. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Sophie's eyes drifted to the photo of Charles on the wall, the one of him in his favorite suit, smiling that quiet smile of his. He looks so happy there, she said. He was, I replied. That picture was taken the night we first met, July 15th, 1955. He just asked me to dance. Sophie smiled through her tears. Grandpa asked you to dance? Yes, I said, laughing softly. He said he knew right then that he was going to marry me someday. I told him he was crazy. Turns out he was just sure. Sophie covered her face, crying openly now. I stood and went to her side, wrapping my arms around her. She hugged me tightly, like she was trying to make up for all the time that had been stolen from us. I missed you so much, she whispered. I missed you too, I said. But we have time now. We'll make the most of it. She nodded against my shoulder, and for the first time I felt something inside me finally settle. Later that night, after she left, I stayed in the kitchen a while longer, tidying up. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Warm, alive. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. On the counter beside it, Charles's Rolex caught the soft kitchen light. The sound of its second hand blended with the clock's ticking. Two rhythms perfectly in sync. The rhythm of time, of love, of 3 generations finding their way back to each other. I smiled to myself and whispered, You'd be proud of her, Charles. The watch ticked on, steady and certain, the sound filling the kitchen, the heartbeat of everything we'd built still alive. The first day of spring came with soft sunlight and the faint sound of children laughing somewhere down the hall. I stood in the main lobby of the Chicago Children's Hospital, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. In front of me hung a polished brass plaque, mounted on white marble. The engraving gleamed in the morning light, the Charles Hartman Memorial Wing, funded by Evelyn Hartman. I reached out and brushed my fingers across his name. The metal was cool against my skin, solid, real, proof that something good had come out of everything we'd been through. Behind me, nurses wheeled in new equipment, volunteers arranged books in the reading corner. Somewhere down the corridor, a little boy's laughter echoed, bright and full of life. This wing had once been Charles's dream. I remembered the night he told me about it decades ago, while we were sitting on the porch with coffee in hand. One day, he'd said, I want to do something that matters, something that lasts. He had no idea that the legacy he left behind would do exactly that. I smiled, thinking of him, the quiet man who never sought attention, who spent 40 years protecting his family in ways I only understood after he was gone. Now his name would live in a place filled with hope, not secrets. Laughter, not lies. I walked down the hallway, passing framed photos of children who had recovered there, tiny footprints painted on the wall in every color. Each step felt lighter than the last. A nurse stopped me near the reception desk. Mrs. Hartman, thank you for your generosity. This wing is already helping so many children. I nodded, smiling. My husband would have liked that. She smiled back. He must have been a good man. The best, I said softly. He believed love wasn't just about feeling, it was about action. When she left, I stood alone for a moment longer, looking at the sunlight streaming through the glass ceiling. The air smelled faintly of flowers from the opening ceremony, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. In my purse, I could feel the familiar weight of the Rolex resting against my hand. I pulled it out and turned it over, the second hand moving in its calm, steady rhythm. Charles's rhythm. It wasn't just a watch anymore. It was everything. Time, memory, protection, love. I fastened it around my wrist. The ticking blended with the soft sounds of the hospital, monitors beeping, footsteps echoing, children laughing. For a moment, it all came together. The pain, the healing, the justice, the love. Every beat of that watch was a reminder that protection is love in motion. As I turned to leave, my reflection shimmered in the polished plaque. I whispered quietly, just for him, "We did it, Charles." And in that stillness, with the light pouring through the glass and the sound of the ticking watch keeping time, I could almost hear his voice again, steady, proud, and full of warmth. The greatest love stories aren't about passion. They're about protection, someone loving you enough to fight battles you never saw coming.